They're asking the court to declare you mentally unfit. That's what my attorney said. 3 weeks after my husband died. I thought the worst thing that could happen had already happened. I was wrong. My own parents had filed a petition to take control of his $4 million estate, claiming I was too unstable to manage it. Too emotional. Too medicated. Too fragile. But they miscalculated one thing. I had my medical records. I had their email outlining a temporary control strategy. And I had a voicemail they never meant for me to hear. They thought grief made me weak. They didn't realize it made me pay attention. Based on the attached psychiatric concerns, we respectfully request that the court find Emily Carter mentally unfit to manage the estate of Daniel Carter. I read the sentence 3 times before it made sense. The envelope was still open in my lap. Certified mail. Harris County Probate Court stamped across the top. My name typed in clean black ink. Mentally unfit. The air in the living room felt thin, like the oxygen had been quietly reduced while I wasn't paying attention. It was late September in Houston, humid even with the AC running. Daniel's leather briefcase still sat beside the fireplace where he'd left it the night before he died. I kept staring at the phrase. Filed by petitioners. Robert and Linda Morales. My parents. They weren't contesting the will. They were asking a judge to remove me from control of my late husband's $4 million estate and appoint themselves as my legal guardians. I'm 36 years old. I have an MBA from Rice. Before Daniel launched his cybersecurity firm, I worked in corporate risk compliance for a regional bank downtown. Numbers never intimidated me. Contracts didn't scare me. Daniel and I met at a fintech conference in Austin. He was building back-end encryption tools for mid-size medical practices, HIPAA compliance infrastructure, mostly boring to anyone outside the industry. I liked that about him. He built quiet systems that protected people. When he decided to go out on his own, I left my job and handled operations during the first year. Vendor contracts. Payroll. Insurance negotiations. I drafted the first operating agreement with a template from a small business clinic and a pro bono attorney we could barely afford. Those early years weren't glamorous. We lived in a 2-bedroom townhouse in the Heights. I tracked every expense in a shared spreadsheet. When cash flow tightened, I picked up consulting projects. Daniel coded through the night, headphones on, glow from 3 monitors lighting the dining room. The company grew steadily, not explosively. By year 7, Carter Secure Systems had 12 employees and recurring contracts across Texas. Daniel insisted we keep overhead lean. We reinvested profits. Bought a modest but beautiful home in West University. Maxed out retirement accounts. Built a diversified portfolio with a fiduciary advisor. The estate that later became the center of the fight wasn't a lottery win. It was years of disciplined decisions. Daniel died on a Tuesday morning. A hemorrhagic stroke. 42 years old. No warning. He collapsed in our kitchen while making coffee. I remember the sound of ceramic shattering and thinking he dropped a mug. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was unconscious. He never woke up. Grief is physical. It's not poetic. It's nausea. It's forgetting to eat. It's staring at a closet full of someone's clothes and feeling like you're trespassing. In those first weeks, my parents were attentive. My mother reorganized my pantry. My father offered to look over business documents so I wouldn't feel overwhelmed. They brought casseroles. Handled some phone calls. At first, it felt like relief. But there were moments. Small ones. My father asking, "How complex are Daniel's accounts? Do you understand all of it?" My mother suggesting, maybe it would be safer if someone else temporarily handled the finances until you're stable. Stable. I assumed they meant emotionally. I ignored the slight tightening in my chest when my father asked for copies of the operating agreement, just in case. I told myself I was projecting. I had just lost my husband. Everything felt sharp. That was the first moment I ignored my intuition. The court filing claimed I was exhibiting signs of acute psychological instability, and referenced the fact that I had been prescribed anti-anxiety medication after Daniel's death. That part was true. My primary care physician had prescribed a low-dose benzodiazepine for short-term panic episodes. I took it sparingly. I was transparent about it. The petition framed it as evidence of cognitive impairment. They requested temporary guardianship under Texas Estates Code Chapter 1101, arguing I was incapable of managing complex financial instruments and business interests. If granted, they would assume control of Daniel's 100% ownership of Carter Secure Systems, valued at approximately $2.6 million based on last internal valuation. Our brokerage accounts. The house. Liquid cash assets. They were not contesting the will. Daniel's will was straightforward, everything to me. They were trying to sidestep it by declaring me incompetent. I called Karen Liu that afternoon. Karen had helped us update our estate plan 2 years earlier. She specialized in probate litigation. She didn't react emotionally when I forwarded her the petition. "This is serious," she said evenly. "But it's also aggressive. Courts don't grant guardianships lightly. What do they need to prove?" I asked. "That you lack capacity to manage your affairs. Usually medical testimony. Evidence of inability to understand financial decisions." "I'm grieving," I said. "I'm not incapacitated." "I know," she replied. "But we need documentation." I requested my full medical records from Memorial Hermann. Every note. Every chart. The physician's assessment was clear. Patient alert and oriented X4. No evidence of cognitive impairment. Prescribed short-term anxiolytic for situational grief. No psychiatric diagnosis. No recommendation for further evaluation. Karen explained that in Texas, guardianship requires clear and convincing evidence that the proposed ward cannot provide for food, clothing, shelter, or manage financial affairs. Grief did not qualify. Still, the filing unsettled me. Why would my parents risk something this drastic? The answer came by accident. 3 days after I received the petition, my mother forwarded me an email chain. She claimed it was sent by mistake. The subject line read, Temporary Control Strategy. The email wasn't addressed to me. It was between her, my father, and someone named Greg H. Greg was a financial planner I vaguely remembered my father mentioning once. My father had written, "If Emily is declared temporarily unfit, we can move quickly before she regains footing. The business valuation could drop if contracts lapse. It's safer if we oversee restructuring immediately." Safer. My hands went cold. This wasn't about protecting me from making poor decisions. It was about controlling the company before I had a chance to solidify my authority as sole owner. The next piece came 2 nights later. My father called and left a voicemail while I was asleep. The message cut off abruptly, but not before 30 seconds of background conversation had been recorded. I listened to it twice. His voice, low, impatient. "She's emotional. The judge will see that. We just need the evaluation to sound formal enough. Once we're appointed, she won't be able to undo it quickly." I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, phone in my hand. There it was. Not concern. Strategy. I didn't feel rage first. I felt shame. What if they were right? What if I wasn't thinking clearly? I hadn't slept properly in weeks. I'd forgotten to respond to 2 vendor emails. One payroll submission had been delayed by 12 hours because I misread a notification. At 2 a.m., doubts grow teeth. I opened Daniel's laptop and scrolled through company accounts, half convinced I would find evidence of my own incompetence. Instead, I found clean ledgers. Recurring contracts still active. Our employees steady. I was functioning. But the petition had planted something corrosive. The quiet breakdown came in the laundry room. Not dramatic. No screaming. I was folding Daniel's t-shirts and suddenly couldn't breathe. I slid down against the dryer and let myself cry into a stack of cotton. Not because of the money. Because my parents believed, or pretended to believe, I was incapable. The next morning, I scheduled an emergency appointment with my therapist. I'd started seeing her after Daniel's death. Dr. Patel listened without interruption. "Do you feel unable to manage your affairs?" she asked gently. "No," I said. "But I feel like I'm being told I am." "That's different," she replied. "That's destabilization." The word sat with me. Destabilization. Making someone question their own capacity. Karen filed a formal objection to the guardianship petition. We requested dismissal and prepared to present my medical records, affidavits from Daniel's business accountant, documentation of my role in founding the company, the forwarded email, the voicemail recording. Karen warned me, judges are cautious. Even bad faith petitions require careful handling. There's no guarantee. There was one risk. If the judge believed I was emotionally volatile, even temporarily, she could order an independent psychological evaluation. That process could take months, during which the court might appoint temporary co-guardians, meaning my parents could still gain partial control. The thought made my stomach tighten. I almost made a mistake then. I drafted an angry email to my parents threatening to expose them publicly. I didn't send it. Karen's voice echoed in my mind, "Anything you write can be used to demonstrate instability." I deleted it. Control mattered. The probate courtroom was colder than I expected. My parents sat across the aisle. My mother's hands were folded neatly in her lap. My father avoided my eyes. Their attorney argued that my recent prescription and withdrawn behavior demonstrated compromised judgment. I felt my pulse in my throat. Karen stood and presented the medical records. Then the email. Then she asked permission to play the voicemail. The judge allowed it. My father's voice filled the quiet room. "She's emotional. The judge will see that." The silence afterward was heavy. The judge's expression shifted, subtle, but unmistakable. Guardianship is meant to protect vulnerable individuals, not to transfer financial power based on speculation. She dismissed the petition. Further, she noted concerns regarding potential bad faith and reserved the right to consider sanctions. My parents didn't look at me when we left. I didn't look at them either. The dismissal should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like an incision. Clean. Necessary. Permanent. The air outside the Harris County Probate Courthouse was damp and metallic, like rain had passed through earlier and left humidity behind. Karen touched my elbow lightly before we parted. "This isn't necessarily over," she said. "They could appeal. Or attempt something more indirect." "Like what?" "Interfering with the business. Questioning contracts. Spreading doubt. Destabilization again." I drove back to West University in silence. The house felt different when I walked in, less like a sanctuary, more like an asset someone had tried to inventory. That night my father texted. "We were only trying to help you. You're not thinking clearly." I stared at the message for a long time. There's something uniquely disorienting about being told you're unstable immediately after proving you're not. I didn't respond. 3 days later, my operations manager, Luis, called. "Emily, did someone reach out to you about restructuring authority?" "What do you mean?" "We got an inquiry from an outside advisor claiming there might be temporary oversight changes pending. They asked about our largest hospital contract." My stomach tightened. "Who?" I asked. He gave me a name. Greg H. The same Greg from the email thread. They weren't appealing the court decision. They were trying to create uncertainty around my leadership. In a small cybersecurity firm, perception matters. Hospitals don't tolerate instability. If even one client believed there was internal conflict, contracts could be delayed or terminated. That was the real leverage point. I called Karen immediately. "They can't legally represent themselves as having authority," she said. "But they can insinuate. We need to act fast." We sent cease and desist letters to Greg and to my parents, formally notifying them that any interference with Carter's secure systems would be treated as tortious interference with business relations under Texas law. It sounded aggressive. It was necessary. But here's the part one don't like admitting. For a brief moment, I considered stepping back from the company. Selling it. Liquidating everything and disappearing into something simpler. That was my second imperfect reaction. Grief makes you crave escape. But Daniel hadn't built that company for it to be dismantled under pressure. And I hadn't spent 7 years structuring it to surrender because someone questioned my stability. 10. Therapy and self-doubt. 2 weeks later, I sat across from Dr. Patel again. Her office always smelled faintly of jasmine tea. The lighting was soft but not dim. Neutral, like she understood intensity needed room but not darkness. I keep replaying it, I told her. The word unfit. Why that word? Because it implies deficiency. Like I'm broken. She nodded slowly. When people challenge your competence, especially during grief, it hits at identity. You built that business. You supported that marriage. You are not a passive beneficiary. I exhaled. I almost believed them, I admitted. Just for a second. That's human, she said. Gaslighting works because it leverages vulnerability. I hated the word gaslighting. It felt overused. But in this case, it was precise. The petition hadn't been random cruelty. It was calculated destabilization. Karen suggested we consider filing a motion for sanctions based on bad faith guardianship filing. Texas courts don't appreciate misuse of probate proceedings, she explained. Especially when financial motives are documented. The decision wasn't simple. If I escalated, the conflict would become public record in greater detail. Local business press occasionally monitors probate disputes involving business owners. Exposure meant visibility. Visibility meant scrutiny. I had to weigh reputation against accountability. What would you advise if I weren't your client? I asked Karen. She leaned back in her chair. I'd advise you to protect long-term deterrence. If there are no consequences, they may attempt something again. The motion wasn't about revenge. It was about precedent. We filed it. Attached, the email chain, the voicemail transcript, evidence of Greg's contact with our operations team. The risk? If the judge interpreted this as family infighting rather than abusive process, it could be dismissed quietly. Karen was clear, no guarantees. My parents asked to meet. A neutral location. We chose a quiet restaurant in River Oaks around 3 p.m., between lunch and dinner. The place was mostly empty. Air conditioning slightly too cold. Silverware aligned perfectly on white linen. My mother looked tired. My father looked irritated. You didn't have to file sanctions, he began. You didn't have to file guardianship, I replied evenly. We were worried, my mother said softly. About what? I asked. My grief? Or the valuation? Silence. My father's jaw tightened. You're not thinking strategically. Daniel handled most of the high-level negotiations. I handled payroll, vendor contracts, and compliance filings for 7 years, I said. You know that. He didn't respond. There was no shouting. No dramatic confession. Just quiet calculation on both sides. We thought temporary control would stabilize things, my father said finally. For whom? I asked. He didn't answer. That was the closest I came to anger in public. Controlled. Direct. They realized then that the narrative of fragile widow wasn't sustainable. I left before dessert. The sanctions hearing was shorter than the first. The judge reviewed the filings carefully. She asked pointed questions about Greg's outreach to my company. My parents' attorney argued it was miscommunication. The voicemail contradicted that. In the end, the judge stopped short of severe penalties but issued a formal reprimand and ordered them to pay partial attorney's fees associated with defending the guardianship petition. It wasn't financial devastation. It was official recognition of bad faith. On record. That mattered. After the hearings ended, the house felt heavier. Not because of fear anymore. Because of absence. I had lost my husband. And now, in a quieter way, I had lost my parents. They stopped calling. I stopped trying. Holidays became logistical puzzles. Mutual relatives chose neutrality. There's a peculiar loneliness that comes from realizing the people who raised you attempted to legally disempower you. No dramatic estrangement announcement. Just silence. One evening in November, I sat at the dining table reviewing quarterly reports. The kitchen light hummed faintly. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked intermittently. For a moment, I wished Daniel were there to reassure me I wasn't overreacting. That vulnerability doesn't disappear just because you win in court. By December, Houston had cooled into that brief stretch of tolerable winter. The air felt thinner, less oppressive. I took that as a cue to begin restructuring, not emotionally, but legally. If my parents had identified one vulnerability, I assumed others might someday try. Karen and I reviewed everything. Daniel's will had been clean but simple, all assets to me outright. No trust structure beyond basic pour-over provisions. At the time, it made sense. We were young. No children. No anticipated disputes. That assumption had been naive. We created a revocable living trust and transferred ownership of Carter Secure Systems into it. I remained trustee. A corporate fiduciary was named as successor trustee in case of incapacity, not family. We added clear incapacity definitions requiring 2 independent licensed physicians before any authority could shift. No gray areas. No interpretation games. I also formalized my role within the company. Before Daniel's death, my operational involvement had been significant but informal. We updated corporate governance documents to reflect me as managing member and CEO under Texas Business Organizations Code provisions. Board-style advisory oversight was introduced, 2 external advisors with industry backgrounds. Not because I needed supervision. Because transparency protects stability. Louis supported the shift. Clients like structure, he said. It signals continuity. He was right. I met personally with our 3 largest hospital clients. Calm, direct conversations. No oversharing. Daniel's passing doesn't alter our contractual performance, I told them. Operational continuity is intact. And it was. Revenue dipped slightly that quarter, understandably, but no contracts were lost. That was the quiet victory no one outside the company would ever see. Christmas arrived with an absence that felt almost architectural. My parents didn't come. They sent a short email. We hope you find peace. No apology. No accountability. Just distance dressed as civility. I didn't respond. Instead, I invited Luis and his wife over for dinner. We kept it simple, roasted chicken, wine, soft music playing through the house speakers Daniel had installed. There was laughter. Real laughter. And afterward, when the dishes were done and the house quiet again, I stood in the hallway outside our bedroom and felt the loneliness press in. Not catastrophic. Just steady. That night I almost called my mother. Almost. My thumb hovered over her contact. Then I remembered the phrase, temporary control strategy. I set the phone down. Boundaries aren't loud. They're decisions you repeat quietly. Dr. Patel and I shifted focus in the new year. Grief and betrayal overlap, she said during one session. Both involve broken attachment. I nodded. I keep trying to reconcile the version of them I grew up with and the version who filed that petition. Both can exist, she said gently. People are rarely singular. That was harder than anger. Anger is clean. Complexity isn't. I admitted something else in that session. I'm afraid of becoming guarded. Of assuming hidden motives everywhere. That's the risk, she said. But hypervigilance isn't the same as wisdom. You're building systems now, not walls. There's a difference. Walls isolate. Systems clarify. In February, a colleague from a cybersecurity conference asked me to coffee. His name was Marcus. We'd met briefly 2 years earlier when Daniel was alive. It felt almost disloyal to consider going. That was the unexpected emotional reaction I hadn't prepared for, guilt. Not because I was betraying Daniel. but because rebuilding any part of my personal life felt like acknowledging permanence. I told Dr. Patel about it. "You're allowed to have connection," she said. The coffee was uneventful. Calm. Two professionals discussing industry trends and vendor compliance shifts. He didn't push. I didn't overshare. When he asked if I'd like to meet again, I said yes, but slowly. Cautious doesn't mean closed. That distinction mattered. The sanctions order required my parents to pay a portion of my legal fees. They did, through their attorney. No apology attached. The estate remained intact, but the legal costs had not been insignificant. Roughly $68,000 in total defense and restructuring expenses. A portion reimbursed. A portion absorbed. That's something people rarely talk about. Winning doesn't mean unscathed. I adjusted my personal cash reserves and rebalanced part of the brokerage account to maintain liquidity buffers. Daniel had always emphasized 6 months of operating expenses in reserve for the company. I extended it to 9. Control isn't paranoia. It's preparation. In March, I received a call from a distant cousin hinting that my parents were telling relatives I had cut them off without explanation. The old impulse surged. Defend yourself. Explain everything. Send the court transcript to the entire extended family. I drafted a long message outlining the guardianship petition, the voicemail, the sanctions. Halfway through writing it, I stopped. Public validation wouldn't restore integrity. It would only escalate the narrative. I deleted the draft. That was growth. The last time I saw my parents in person was at a mutual family wedding in Galveston that summer. The ceremony was outdoors, ocean air thick and salty. The sun dropped low over the water, casting long gold shadows. My mother approached me near the reception tables. "You look well," she said carefully. "I am," I replied. There was a pause. "We were scared," she said finally. "You were," distant after Daniel died. "I was grieving," I said. She nodded. No dramatic reconciliation. No full admission. Just two adults standing in a space where trust used to live. "I hope you're taking care of yourself," she said. "I am," I answered. And that was it. Sometimes accountability isn't a confession. It's consequences that stand quietly in the background of every future interaction. People imagine betrayal as explosive. Affairs. Screaming matches. Public humiliation. This wasn't that. This was paperwork. Legal language. Strategic framing. A petition filed under the guise of concern. The most unsettling part wasn't the attempt to control money. It was the attempt to redefine me. To reduce years of competence into a temporary diagnosis. But grief didn't make me incapable. It made me observant. It forced me to examine systems, legal, financial, emotional, and strengthen them. Carter Secure Systems crossed $5 million in valuation that year. Not because I proved anything to anyone. Because the foundation was real. I still miss Daniel in quiet, ordinary ways. The way he adjusted the thermostat too low. The way he left coffee cups on his desk. Loss doesn't disappear just because conflict resolves. But clarity grows. They tried to declare me mentally unfit. Instead, they revealed exactly who they were. And I revealed something to myself too. Grief exposes character. Not weakness. This wasn't revenge. It was accountability.